Well, hey everybody, it sure has been a while, hasn't it? So I'm just gonna jump right in and pretend I never left. So those of you who watched my last video definitely inferred that I'm a pretty big sports fan and watch a lot of sports related content. One of the channels I frequent is Barry I don't know if I can say that yet, Inner. As a fellow Tom Brady realist, I find myself agreeing with a lot of his points and also think the tone and sense of humor and the running gags in his videos are pretty funny, but recently he put out a video where he broke into the realm of cinema. Hey, that's my realm. Specifically movies he believes are highly overrated, and the results are, well, I'll get into it. Let's just say right off the bat that while I may take issue with certain things he says, I'm not saying that it's invalid to have a different opinion than mine. The reason I'm really making this video is more to comment on certain trends that I've noticed around the way some people view movies. I'll also bring up right now probably my biggest criticism of the video's presentation. It looks like most of the footage is just low quality GIFs that he found on Google Images or something. Some of them even look as though he went out of his way to find the worst quality one there is. I know that's his style, and it works pretty well for the sports format, I think, but if you're gonna break into the movie scene, you should probably find some footage that doesn't look like it was shot on a potato. So without further ado, which I think is just a fancier way of saying without any more bullshit, let's get into it. Number 10 is Scarface, which I haven't seen, so I won't comment on the merits of the film itself. I just find it a little odd that Barry says he enjoys it because of how over the top it is, but it's overrated because
it's not supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be brutal and depict the rise and fall of an immigrant in the drug dealing business of 1980s Miami. But Al Pacino's over-the-top accent and mannerisms make it impossible to take anything Tony Montana does seriously.
I wouldn't put something I enjoy in my top 10 most overrated movies ever, but that's just me. Number 9 is The Empire Strikes Back. I used to absolutely love this movie back when I first watched the original trilogy, and I still think it's the best Star Wars movie, but now I think it's merely really good instead of one of the best movies ever. By that definition, I'd agree that it's overhyped because you literally can't escape it if you're at all plugged into pop culture. It's so baked in that even people who have never seen a Star Wars movie before know the twist at the end. This one has some particularly confusing reasoning for why Barry put it on the list. Near the start of his analysis, he calls it an objectively good movie, cringe, but then at the end he says this.
To sum it all up, The Empire Strikes Back is the movie equivalent of 2 hamburger buns with no burger in the middle.
The reasoning is that Luke doesn't do much of anything on Dagobah.
I disagree. I disagree, Harry.
That's the soul of the movie, man. Luke learning what it means to be a Jedi, not a fighter.
Luminous beings, Zoe, not this crude matter. You must feel the force around you.
This is the first instance of Barry exemplifying an attitude I see a lot in the average moviegoer, where apparently people's appreciation for a movie just boils down to a basic recap of events. I get that not everyone is looking to delve into deeper themes and maybe just want to shut their brain off and be entertained for 2 hours, but at the same time, I don't know how you could miss the importance of Yoda's role. It seems pretty apparent that he fills Obi-Wan's shoes as a wise master who guides Luke through his struggles with the Force. It's just a very odd and vague way to describe these events. Number 8 is Avatar. This is an interesting one for me because, as Barry himself points out, it's sort of become in vogue to say that Avatar is overrated because of how successful it was and the utter lack of cultural impact it's had. Its status is very strange, but when I rewatched it before the new one came out, I thought to myself, perhaps the internet treated you too harshly. The story is definitely overdone, but there are some clever elements sprinkled in, and it was legitimately a revolutionary step up for visual effects. It still looks better than a lot of big budget movies do now. Looking right at you, Marvel. Barry's analysis makes it seem like he hasn't seen it since it was in theaters, which, for me, that's too far back in the memory bank to make this kind of assertion. I mean, it came out over a decade ago now. I kind of agree with what he says, though.
It was a solid action film with some cool moments, but is it worthy of being the highest grossing movie ever? No.
Number 7 is Titanic. As evidence that I stand by my word, I haven't seen this movie in years, so I'm not gonna comment on this one outside of the whole "there was room on the door for both of them" talking point.
You're correct, sir.
Now here's where we hit a stretch of movies that I legitimately love, so prepare for more butthurtedness. Number 6 is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'll admit it, I'm a Lord of the Rings nerd, so when I saw this I instantly cried and shit myself at the same time, but I'll try and push through this trauma and see what he has to say, which is totally valid. The general reasoning he gives here is that he couldn't understand what was happening at times and finds them boring/overly long. Having an issue with the length is completely understandable. I mean, that's my most common criticism with other movies, probably. But part of why the series works so well for me is because of Fellowship's opening summary, which tells you all the necessary information about the lore and the history of this world in a concise, entertaining way. If Fellowship was disappointing, then the whole series would be disappointing, and it does a great job even in the slower moments of building characters as well as the world. So when he says,
"There's just so much filler walking around,"
I disagree.
Now Barry has a pretty infamous trolling history, so it's entirely possible that he's just saying some of this stuff to stir the pot, but there's one thing he says that leaves me just scratching my head.
The only thing that made sense to me was Sean Bean's character dying almost immediately after he was introduced.
What?
Did you miss the part where he was a founding member of the Fellowship from the very start? You even have a low-quality GIF of that very scene.
Maybe Lord of the Rings is above my intelligence level and I'm too dumb to understand its genius.
Well, to be fair, you do have to have a high IQ to understand the complexities of the Middle-earth saga, so I don't blame you. Number 5 is Mad Max Fury Road.
Must read.
Again, a movie I love, so let's see what he has to say.
First off, Tom Hardy's Max character, we really never learn much about him. He's just kinda there, which is a waste of Hardy's talents as an actor. We aren't really given any reason to be invested in him besides the fact that he's the title character. But it's not just him, we're really not given any incentive to be invested in any other character, really.
Yes, they don't get much backstory, but Max and Furiosa, like many other aspects of the movie, actually benefit from a lack of it.
Charlize Theron's one-arm character looks cool, but again, we don't really care about her, outside of the fact that she looks cool.
You mean we?
This is you.
Okay,
this
not
is a you
we.
thing.
I think it's so much more entertaining that the film just throws you into this series of events in a post-apocalyptic wasteland and gives you a couple characters trying to do good in two different ways. The fact that Max is a blank slate and not very caring at first is part of the character's arc, and Furiosa is the catalyst for his growth. Because
Joe is underutilized, and instead more attention is given to his 5 quote-unquote wives that are annoying and also really serve no purpose other than to look pretty and be pregnant.
yes, that's literally the point. Joe is representative of power-hungry men who view women as having no other purpose than to look pretty and be pregnant. There's a great YouTube video called Fury Road Explained by George Carlin that you should watch if you want to get a better idea of this theme. Also, as much as I love this movie, I don't want a sequel because writers have a tendency to, after the fact, over-explain things that nobody was ever confused about. Seriously, why couldn't his last name just be Solo? What the fuck is wrong with you? Let's move on. Number 4 is The Shining. This one I understand his reasoning the most.
Psychological thrillers have never been my cup of tea, so maybe that's why I don't revere this movie like so many others do.
If a certain genre just doesn't connect with you, that's completely understandable. This one just comes down to a difference in taste, I think. The parts that Barry and many others describe as boring are an exercise in building the setting and atmosphere. I personally have worked in a hotel, and I always found the slower days super creepy when I would just walk down a long hallway with no other souls in sight. So a heady horror movie with this setting really hits home for me. I should also point out that I'm not one of those Room 237 weirdos who invent insane theories out of nothing.
The only capital letters on the key are ROOM and then the N from the acronym NO. And if there's only 2 words that you can come up with that have those letters in them, and that's moon and room.
Only 2 words? You know what else I can spell? Moron.
Even the famous "Here's Johnny" scene at the end felt a little forced and out of place.
Oh yeah? Well...
Here's Johnny! Are you sure about that?
Number 3 is Top Gun Maverick. This one I would say I agree with the most, but I still understand why it struck a chord with people. Sure, it's pretty cheesy, but I will give it this. It doesn't feel of its time. The best way I could describe Top Gun Maverick is that if they gave a director in the 90s the technology of today to make an action movie, this would be the result. That's both in a positive and a negative way. The practical action is awesome, and I hope that this movie's success leads to a resurgence in this practice in the near future. However, like many 90s movies, it also feels extremely tropey. I think the Jennifer Connelly side plot is all but meaningless to the overall story. Basically, whenever she comes on screen is when you can go to the bathroom and not miss anything important. So yeah, I'm not in love with it, but I can see why a lot of people are.
Because it's about America blowing up enemies and shit.
Number 2 is Rosemary's Baby.
This movie is held in such high esteem, and I will never understand why.
Now, you'll never catch me saying that someone is wrong for having a different experience watching something than me, or not getting the same level of appreciation out of something. Having said that, here's another, more egregious example of the basic recap of events outlook I described earlier.
At the very end of the film, she has Satan's baby, but we don't ever see the baby, and the entire film just feels like a giant waste of time.
Yes, if you give a vague plot description of Rosemary's Baby, it could sound like it's pretty boring. But there are other elements at play that make the film much more effective. The real terror comes from the manipulation of Rosemary's character. It's been said by many other people, but this is basically gaslighting the movie.
Be trying to prove that I'm not crazy when I knew I wasn't crazy.
Right. The fact that the most horrific imagery is left up to interpretation fits this theme perfectly. When Rosemary really sees what's going on, we don't. That makes us question everything to another layer. So there you go, I just explained why this movie is held in such high regard. Also, if I had a nickel for every time Roman Polanski made one of the most influential movies of all time, with a major plot point being the abuse and sexual assault of a woman, only to later do that himself, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it is weird that it happened twice. And finally, number 1 is the Blair Witch Project. I don't have strong feelings about this movie one way or the other. It's not the most entertaining thing in the world for me because I just don't jive with most mainstream horror movies because they've all been done to death. But I like that it popularized the found footage technique, and I think it did it pretty well. I don't hold it responsible for the found footage cancer explosion that happened around 2010, and anyone who does is just being silly. The fact that the actors never really went on to do anything else notable also helps this illusion quite a bit. I was 2 years old when this came out, so I can't speak to the hype around it when it was released, so if you were around to witness it, I could see why you would be annoyed by the hype train, but most overrated movie of all time? I wouldn't go that far. So in conclusion, Barry, if you for some reason watched this, thanks for being a good sport, and if I was gonna give you any advice, which clearly I'm in the position to do, I would say make more of a bold statement with your style. I know you go really in depth with your sports analysis, so do the same if you're gonna break into the movie subgenre. This is already a super overcrowded market, so make your presence known, dude. That way even people like me who don't necessarily align with your tastes might still watch. Thank you. Good luck, you beautiful bastard. At least you're not as fraudulent as Katie's rings.